UBC, inspiring Uganda.
Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is 𝐀𝐝𝐝𝐫𝐞𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐴𝐻𝐿. The heat is on. The difference between you wearing a jacket and not could be a difference of about 3 degrees there. But what if those 3 degrees increase? What happens? It could be a global catastrophe in terms of weather. It could be heat waves, diversification, all having something like deserts in different areas there. But the biggest concern now is the heat that has been ravaging most of East Africa, Africa, and Europe, which is adversely affected by it. Some reports deem us to be extremely above 1.5 degrees that was agreed upon in the Paris Agreement. What does that mean for us? How bad does it have to get before we act on it? Tonight, we discuss the heat. We also discuss climate and where it is taking us. What happens to humanity? What happens to food security? And most of all, as a country where we depend on agriculture, what happens to agriculture? Looking at what has been happening in the different areas there. So I'll be telling you about the different areas of the continent, especially in the East Africa. Especially if you look at Uganda, you'll be able to see that we're between 22 and 25 degrees there. But also when you look at different countries like Brazil, Australia, Somalia, Nigeria, and Madagascar, the heat is ravaging most of those countries. When you look at what is happening with floods all over the globe there, in different areas there, fires catching in different parts of the country, but Europe suffering the most. Uganda, as you see it there, is between 22 and 25, just in the central region. But when you go up north, it goes even further to about 30 upwards there. But also that's Sudan, which is between 35 and 40 degrees. Schools have been closed in that area, especially because of the heat wave that is happening. That's Kenya. That is between 25 to about 30 degrees. But also the heat there ravaging, and also the desert pushing even closer to the central parts of the country. Food security becoming a question. You go further to look at Tanzania there, which is between 28 to about 32 degrees. The heat is ravaging most of East Africa there. That's the globe, and picking on some of the countries from Brazil to Australia to Somalia, Nigeria, and Madagascar. That's what's happening in most of the countries. But let's talk about what's happening in Uganda, what we can do about it. This has been on since June last year, to where we are right now. The rains, the patterns of the sun and the rains are becoming something that we cannot predict anymore. So let's get to our panel, but before we do that, you can be part of the show. Join us both on YouTube, drop your comment there, or text us or WhatsApp us on the number 0709 60 25 92, or you can go to our X platform, hashtag UBC Behind the Headlines. So for now, let's meet the panel. On my extreme left, seated closest to me, is Professor Sarah Sali, who is a Dean at the School of Gender and Women's Studies, who is here to give us exactly what happens in the different areas there. Next to Professor is Edward Mwavu, who is a researcher and an innovator with the Research and Innovation Project Fund at Makerere University. He'll be telling us exactly what innovations are happening, have they gone wayward, or are they helping us improve on climate going forward. Next to the professor is Aaron Kiza, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Environment Shield, but also a lawyer. Finally, a person from the Ministry of Water and Environment, Dr. 𝐀𝐝𝐝𝐫𝐞𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐧𝑠, Tindmgaya, who is the Acting Director of Water Resource Management at the Ministry of Water and Environment. So please be part of the conversation tonight and let us know what you think. Dr. 𝐀𝐝𝐝𝐫𝐞𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐧𝑠, I'll start with you from here exactly. Especially looking at how our forest cover in 90s was 54%. Recently going to 9.5%, but also growing to 13.4% in the most recent. The wetlands at 15.5% in the 90s, dropping to about 13%. How did we get here?
Thank you very much, moderator. Yes, indeed, we ought to be concerned as a country. Unfortunately, that's where we are because of our actions. Uganda's population, of course, is growing at a very, very high rate, 3.3%, one of the highest in the world. And this is coming with challenges of degradation. And right now we are having people actually destroying wetlands, destroying forests, as we try to improve our food production, but also as people try to survive. So unfortunately, our actions are causing these challenges, and that's why we need to rethink our actions and address them so that we can improve the forest cover and the wetland cover.
Yeah, Doctor, you have mentioned that, but you know, many of us, and I'm glad you've given us that synopsis to understand exactly how we got here. But what's the mandate of the Ministry of Water and Environment from your point of view? And what are these policies you're talking about, especially, that are supposed to be helping in these times?
Thank you very much. The Ministry of Water and Environment is the government agency responsible for all issues of water, environment, and climate change. We are responsible for provision of water for drinking to Ugandans in the rural and urban areas. We do provide water for production, agriculture, energy, industry, and all the productive purposes. But we also manage this water so that it is available now with the right quantity and quality, and also ensure that we share this water with other countries equitably. But also maintain the environment. We are responsible for ensuring that we promote tree planting. Now we call it actually tree growing, so that we can improve the tree cover. And of course, ensure that the trees perform the function they are supposed to perform, as we shall mention later. But also we maintain the environment, wetlands, riverbanks, mountain areas. But we do it on behalf of Ugandans, and we do it with Ugandans.
So you make policy, you implement policy?
We make policy, and we spearhead implementation of the policies, but working with other stakeholders. We don't implement alone. We implement with the local governments, we implement with the people themselves, we implement with the civil society, private sector, cultural institution, religious institution, academia, and all the stakeholders, but we set the direction.
Thank you very much. Let me come to Professor Edward. Professor, it's good to have you, first of all, on the show. I know it's your maiden appearance here, so good evening, and it's very good to have you.
Good evening to all our listeners and the viewers out there. I'm from the Department of Forestry, Biodiversity and Tourism in the School of Forestry, Environmental and Geographical Sciences in the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, Makerere University.
So, Professor, when you look at the heat wave, the heat that is in Kampala, schools in South Sudan closed, seeing fires in different areas in Europe there, what do you take? What is your view on this?
Obviously,
especially in climate.
Obviously, we are saying that there is increased emissions into the atmosphere, and this affects the ozone layer, and therefore we receive more direct sun rays to the ground. So these changes in the atmosphere, because of the emissions through human actions, is what is one of the contributing factors to the changes in our climate. And when we talk about climate, we're talking about over 30 years. So let us be able to differentiate between climate change and climate variability. Yeah, the other one is a longer period, but what we're seeing today or the other day is, we can refer to it as what? Weather.
Professor, when you look at especially the weather patterns we're having right now, some of Jan was rainy, some of December was, we expected rains this much, they're nowhere to be seen, they're a bit scant in where they're pouring there. What is your reading of our weather patterns, and how did we get here, and how bad is it?
You know, with increasing emissions and also loss of most of the tree cover, the vegetation, what would have helped in observing some of the solar energy is not available. And therefore, we find ourselves in a situation that all what comes from the sun hits us directly, and there are no any other area to cover us up. You look at the cities, you see the difference between places which have got concrete and places which have got trees. There will be a difference. You can't compare a person who is in Kololo and Makerere, they are feeling the same impact. No. At least if I'm in Makerere, I'm likely to feel a little bit better, because I can be able to benefit from the shades of the trees and the cooling effect of trees around me.
Thank you very much. Aaron, let me come to you, both as a council but also as a champion of climate change and how we need to be better. I know you were behind Bugoma Forest. I know you have been championing different areas of improving our weather and climate there. When you look at what is happening to us, why are we experiencing this extreme weather now?
because even the ministry has confirmed through the agency called NEMA, we are in a climate emergency. So, and the climate emergency is such that the extreme conditions of weather, the extreme weather conditions like floods, like heat waves, like earthquakes, like landslides, become so prevalent that they exceed our ability to deal with them unless we switch into emergency mode. But of course, the climate emergency, like the professor said, is itself a result of too much emissions of greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide, which takes the largest share, but also methane and fluorocarbons. So these emissions, once they have been emitted into the atmosphere, they form a blanket called an atmospheric blanket that traps heat that should be radiating back to the sun, that traps it here, causing what used to be global warming, but what now has been called global boiling by the United Nations general standards. The era of global warming is over. We are now into the era of global boiling, and it has devastating consequences for our health, for our crops, for our income, but also for our lives. People are actually dying because of the heat waves, because of the climate crisis, because of our consumption patterns of energy, because of the trees you are cutting, because of the wetlands you are encroaching, because of some unseriousness about climate solutions. People are dying and people are going hungry, and yes, countries are beginning to heat up, and this can only be worse. Last year was the hottest year on record. This year promises even break that record unless something dramatically changes. So, yeah, I hope I've made sense of your question.
Yeah, and I'm glad you have really exhausted what we are up to right now. But when you look at what we're experiencing, you've talked about carbon emissions there. But when you look at this, what other drivers are leading us into this area where you're calling it global boiling?
Yeah, because the state of the climate, of course, there are things that exacerbate it. It's just that we have to mention carbon so that we know the primary cause. The primary cause of the climate crisis are fossil fuels. That is over 85%. If you get yourself away from the problem, you get wrong things. However, there are approaches to climate change. One of them is mitigation, reducing those greenhouse gas emissions. But there are nature-based solutions. Again, the minister official was very clear. We need to enlarge to recover our forest cover. We need to enlarge our wetland cover. We are doing the opposite. How can we deal with the heat wave when we are destroying wetlands, powering concrete, in building factories in wetlands, destroying forests, replacing them with sugarcane? You can't fight a heat wave like that. We need to preserve our forests. We need to preserve our wetlands. We need to have urban trees, and we need to have a sensitized Ugandan polity. Students need to know about these things. They don't need to end at the Department of Gender. They don't need to, they must come. But of course, even students at Makerere, students in all tertiary institutions, students in secondary school, students at the primary level must know that they have a role to play, and the entire guy, the border man on the street. Again, the minister official was very clear, they do with stakeholders, and among the key stakeholders is the general population. This message needs to get to our grandmothers in Chisoro and Kabaramaido, so that they know that they are, even as they need to live and live off a forest of firewood, there is a responsibility for us to preserve these trees and figure out alternative ways, practical ways. Is it more effective heating stoves? And also urge, of course, our government to expand the rural electrification program, and hope that science gets up to speed with the batteries for solar energy and pricing of the same. There is a lot that needs to be done, but what is within our means is nature. We need to protect our nature. our wetlands, our rivers, our lakes, our forests are real answers to the climate crisis because they help us to shoulder us from the effects. When there is a wind, if your banana plantation will not fall down if it is surrounded by trees, a serious tree cover. When there is a heat wave, you will not feel as much if you are in a tree shade as one who is completely in a bare land, because it has been scientifically proven that the urban trees can actually regulate a microclimate to the difference of even 8 degrees %. So when you're talking about people under serious trees, they can be at 20 degrees, while those ones are 28 degrees. So we reduce even the energy consumption, because there are many things that worsen the climate crisis. We just need to think of what can we do as a country, and really we need our trees, we need our rivers, we need our papyrus reeds, we need our national parks. Any person destroying them is the enemy of Uganda.
Okay. Professor, when you listen to all this, and a Ugandan out there deep in the village, I know that I plant my food, whatever. We have a saying that when you throw anything anywhere in Uganda, it can grow. These sound very elitist. How do we bring it home for all of us to feel it? Because I will drink water, I will make sure that I move when the sun is really regulated early in the morning or late in the evening. How do we bring this home for us to know the impact?
Thank you, Timothy, and good evening, our viewers. I think the people are already feeling the impact. It has already come home because the heat is everywhere, crops are failing, we see the floods, we see the landslides. So the effects of climate change are around us. What we recently grappled with as the migration of pastoralists in the north, those are all effects of people looking for pasture, because the ecology as it was perceived and related to in the past is not what is happening today. So the change is there and the people feel it. And what most of the other people have already expressed is true. We need to do much because, of course, there's human activity, which we also have to trace to issues like increasing population, our land tenure systems. You know, we own and own everything, so I own the trees there and I can do to them what happens. I know in some places, although you own the land, you cannot just cut, you cannot do anything you want with them, especially if it affects the environment. But I think what we also need to note is that these are what we call public goods or common assets. You see, even if I'm trying to do some environmental management in my plot and my neighbors are doing otherwise, there's what we call externalities. When we talk about global warming like we're experiencing now, it's not just an effect of local things we are doing locally. If you just do a Google thing to find out why is there a heat wave in these parts of the world now, on Google, you'll be told it's about the movement of certain global winds moving across the equatorial place and also the movement of the sun towards the equator, okay? So, as people have explained, if we had done our bit properly, we would be protected from those kinds of things. But I imagine the global winds that are moving across the equator and creating some of these effects are not just emanating from Africa, or they are not just emanating from Uganda. So there's a role we have to play as a country and as a continent, but we should also not be blinded from the fact that other people elsewhere are also being big environmental polluters, and Africa is turned into the carbon sink. So Africa must protect the environment when others are getting the leeway to pollute. But the good thing is with COP28, I think they tried to look into these things and tried to see, they recently concluded COP28 in January, to try and see how do they reduce on fossil fuels, as the council has already said, but also look at how do they revamp the environment, how do they regenerate places that have gone desolate and or that have been destroyed. And that's why you see even in the donor world, in the research world, there's a lot of funding for climate change, for environmental change. And what are they looking, when you look at all these grant calls, They are looking for someone with an innovative way of managing climate change. So projects that are going to prioritize, for example, tree planting and tree planting by rural people, or come up with any gadget to maintain the environment, I imagine are the ones that are going to be scored. But why is this possible? I think when we debate the climate change issue or global warming or the heat wave, we should be aware that it doesn't just start here. There's a role to play here, but there's also a common planet, and there are common concerns of the common global concerns relating to the environment, because the planet is all we have, and the other people should not be given leeway to pollute or to destroy, and then other people are the only ones supposed to protect. I think let us work at it all together. Of course, it will. There's something Professor Mwavu said, which is very, very important. He talked about the cycles taking around 30 years, yet people on a daily are seeing weather. So it becomes very difficult to tell a person that, you know, if you cut the tree like that, if you remove the wetlands, which is now the big thing in Kampala now is filling up wetlands and building houses. So when you tell people that actually you're destroying the catchments, you're affecting the flow, people don't see that. People just see the rain, they see the sun, they put on ACs, and that is it. But we need to know that these things have long-term consequences and they have long-term effects, and we need to pay more attention. And thank God there are all these regulatory authorities doing their work. We just need to implement the good policies that we have.
And already. Professor, let me stay with you, and let's be realistic. Something Dr. 𝐀𝐝𝐶 said.
Yeah.
The population boom, which is almost 3.3%, the highest in the world, apartments every day. Pass anywhere in Kampala, you'll find a billboard of apartments, building houses, reclaiming wetlands. How do we find the balance between development and the environment conservation?
Thank you. And maybe what I can add on before we go to that is also where you're not seeing apartments and reclaiming wetlands, there's also destroying the environment for agriculture expansion.
Yes. Because
the rural areas, that's what has taken it. Every swamp has gone into rice growing. Every tree has been cut down for fuel and energy. And so it is, and the things which, I mean, forests have been cleared to make more agricultural land. So the impact of the population is real. And because of that, people are trying to survive. But it also boils down to our limited development. So we don't really have much alternatives. We survive through peasantry, and peasantry, given its very inefficient ways of production, will require more land to be opened up in order to produce. Yet if we had more advanced forms of agriculture, if we had alternative mechanisms of fuel and all that, he talked about energy efficient stoves. If we had alternative mechanism of energy, and we had more efficient agricultural production, and we had more value addition to the little we produce so that it stays longer, we have more storage, it would limit to an extent this opening up of land for agricultural production, and then all the apartments that are coming up and everything that's coming up. We would live more, we would be more friendly to the environment, because actually what we are doing does not portray us as people who treat the environment with respect as a system that enables us to survive. And if we continue like that, there will be a problem. But one way to turn that around is if we come up with alternatives that can balance both human survival and the environment. You talked about the economy. Is it possible to balance these things? Yes, actually you can balance. First and foremost, Uganda is not the most populated country. If you talk about per square meter, a lot of land is idle. I mean, not idle, but it's not occupied. So we are not the most populated country on the globe. So how are others coping? And since we are not yet that populated, what can we do strategically so that even as our population continues to increase, we have reined in these destructive practices so that people can easily survive? Of course, you can talk about countries that are overpopulated, like India. And those ones are still also trying to survive through GMs and more advanced mechanism of agriculture. But even us here, we can go for more lucrative, more sustainable practices than just destroying the environment, because although we have a population boom, we are not the most populated country, even on this continent. We are not.
Thank you. Dr. 𝐀𝐝𝐶, let me come to you. Especially looking at this heat wave that is being talked about everywhere. Professor has talked about different analogies being thrown everywhere. El Nino, La Nino. These are things that are happening all over. The winds that are coming, that come from the north and the south, then somehow we are meeting the equator. This heat wave, what has been its impact so far on the economy, agriculture, and livelihoods of human beings?
Thank you very much. Again, if you look at even beyond the heat wave, of course, the temperatures are rising because of climate change. And when temperatures are rising, there are many things that happen. Number one is that we need to cool our bodies. So consumption of water, for example, increases. But also, even when people are working outside, you find that the activities are affected. So we have impact on agriculture. For example, Uganda traditionally has depended on rain-fed agriculture. And of course, you would grow crops and the rain would be there and then the crops would grow. But we can no longer depend on rain-fed agriculture. And that's why, as a country, we are moving to irrigation. Right now, you cannot actually produce all year round without irrigation. But of course, irrigation is about water. So if climate change is increasing, for example, the evaporation, you are losing water into the atmosphere. So the amount of water that we have is reducing. But of course, there are some areas where we have climate change resulting in to increased amount of water, more rainfall. So in some areas, we have too much water resulting in floods. And when floods come, then they affect many things. If, for example, it rains in Kampala, just for 1 hour, you see the impact it has on, for example, transportation. Traffic jam all over. Flooding of buildings, many industries are flooded, but many houses are also flooded. So we have impact on our day-to-day lives in terms of, for example, transportation, agriculture, the mainstay of Uganda, because most of our population is actually depending on agriculture. So agriculture cannot survive without water. So more temperature, more evaporation, you are losing water, and the crops will wither very fast. When it comes, for example, to water, water affects, or we depend on it for many activities. Drinking is number one. So we need more water when it is hotter. We need more water to run the turbines, because Uganda depends on hydropower. So we need water. Now, when there is high temperature, many situations, the water level goes down. So we don't have enough water to run the turbines to generate power. Industries will depend on water. We have also navigation. For example, in Lake Victoria, the water levels will go down and the ships will not dock. Again, if you look at the fisheries, the water levels will go down, the fish breeding grounds are also affected. So the impacts are many. And as we continue to get temperatures rising, the impacts are going to be very grave, and they might end up affecting our welfare. With respect, of course, to the global warming and also the impact of climate change, I think Professor already mentioned that what we are seeing in Uganda doesn't necessarily start in Uganda. The climate, the impact we are having here, are not necessarily starting in Uganda. And that's why when we are dealing with climate change, we have to work with others. And that's why annually we have a conference of parties. The last one was held in Dubai last year. We're in Dubai in November and December, basically to discuss and ensure that those countries which are polluting, which are emitting greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and then resulting in global warming, are actually made to compensate us. We, for example, we have been discussing with them that they should create a fund that will help us to address these challenges. The loss and damage fund, that we are getting losses, we are getting damages because of the problem caused by the developed countries. So again, these are the negotiations we are having, but also we are saying that we need money to be able to live with these challenges. And that's why we are having this funding for adaptation and also mitigation. Mitigation is about basically limiting the emission of greenhouse gases into atmosphere, while adaptation is trying to live with these challenges. And for us as Uganda, as Africa, as developing countries, we are not contributing so much into the greenhouse gas emission. Our option right now and what we are prioritizing is adaptation, that we cannot afford just to look on. We have to live with these challenges. And that's why we are demanding from the international community that they should give us money to be able to address these challenges so that we can be able to live with these changes while we are surviving as a country. And that's why, as Professor mentioned, right now we are having funds available, under Green Climate Fund, for example, under Adaptation Fund, Global Environment Facility, and other funding agencies which developing countries actually are trying to tap in to be able to live with climate change. So the impacts are big, they are many, and we have no option but try and live with them through putting in place measures to adapt to these changes.
Are you doing enough as a ministry?
Well, of course, yes, we are. Yes, we are. Because climate change, as we said, is not a Ugandan problem alone. We are taking action. For example, I've developed a climate change policy. We have environmental policy. We have water policies, laws. So we have done enough to put in place the policy and legal framework. But we also have institutional framework to be able to address these challenges. So we are, at that front, we are doing well. What we need to scale up is now implementation on the ground. And that's why now we are mobilizing all the stakeholders to come together, because it cannot only be government alone. Government will set a policy, we set the strategic direction, we need the stakeholders to come on board, and that's why we are aggressively mobilizing funding, and that's why government has set up actually a climate finance unit in the Ministry of Finance to be able to mobilize Ugandans to take advantage of climate financing so that you can implement. Without money, obviously you can't do much. A policy is there, a law is there, but you need means of implementation, capacity, finances, and also technology.
Thank you very much. Professor Edward, let me come to you. When you, especially from the Department of Forestry, when you look at our forest cover as a country, how soon do we need to react or act before it gets worse? Because the numbers are alarming. 94% of Ugandans depend on charcoal in this country.
Exactly.
Prices for charcoal in the last 6 years have gone up by 180%. So are we really doing enough?
Are we really doing enough? It is the question. For me, I want to, for our viewers to understand that we need nature-based solutions to this. And
what do you mean by nature-based solutions?
Let us use what is provided to us by nature to address some of these challenges. For example, in Makerere, from my department, we have observed that sincerely we need tree cover, to increase the tree cover. But as you know, that the land is limited, and therefore we have to go to use the approach of sharing the land with the trees. And the population, when I move around, you move around the streets of Kampala and the routes to live in Kampala to other up-country places, you realize that the number of roadside nurseries. And from our department, we have been intentional in trying to look at those roadside nurseries, that to us they can play a big role, first of all, in helping the ministry, as he has said, that you need to mobilize the population to increase tree cover. Because our forest, the national forest, which are seen as being taken care of by the government, they are being decimated day and night, and everyone seems not to bother. But for us, we believe that I, Edward Mwavu, when I have my place where I'm going to establish my residence, I need to plant trees. And if I'm going to plant trees, then I should plant the right trees. And what we are lacking now, that you saw when you had NAM, what was planted?
Palm trees.
Palms. Why palms? If you ask, what are the benefits, apart from the beautification, do the palms add to the population? So we are saying that we need these roadside nurseries to be empowered to provide the right seedlings to the buyers, because people are buying seedlings every other day, but what they are buying, they are ornamentals. But we are saying our population is increasing, land is reducing, so you need to have a compound, Bwana Nyangweso, to have a compound with a mango tree, because you want to have multiple benefits from the seedling you have bought on the roadside. But do the people who are producing these seedlings have the skills? Can they advise Edward Mwavu on what to buy? Do they have the indigenous plants which can give us indigenous foods? Because we are talking that indigenous foods are now the way to go, because they are better than some of the foods which are being traded around. So we need to have this sector empowered. From the ministry, I don't know how many certified nurseries do they have that they are going to supply seedlings to the people who are willing to plant trees that they can benefit from those trees. You can buy a seedling and it fails. And if you're asked by your neighbor, where do you get this from? And it's not performing, nobody is going to go back and buy. So we need quality products out there, and we can only get these quality products if these people are skilled. Because if we skill them, they will help us in ensuring that the people who are investing in tree planting get value for the money. They will also will also help us to find employment for our poor urban youth. But the challenges, other challenges we're having is that people are investing in tree planting to green the country. Tomorrow you hear of policies saying there is no export of what? Of processed timber. You ask yourself, what type of carpenters do we have that we are going to process the timber and export it with like finished products? When in other offices, government offices, they are importing furniture from what? From China. So I think when we are coming up with some of these pronouncements and policies, we should first investigate how do they affect some other efforts. Because you are saying you want to increase tree cover, but then people are planting that if I plant my trees, they can stay on my place, on my land for some years, 20 years, then I benefit after selling to a willing buyer. But if there will be no viable income from the trees, because people, not many people are ready to process, they don't have the capacity to process this timber into furniture and then export it to outside markets. You also find that we were talking about charcoal. Charcoal seems to be the cheapest source of energy for domestic use. You can't afford electricity to cook. You understand that? I understand there were some efforts to provide gas cylinders. I only learned of it recently. But to how many households? Then you look at the local governments, the Department of Natural Resources and Production. They are not all that well facilitated, and yet they are at the ground. They need to be facilitated. So we need to also to look at. He was talking about the funds, for carbon funds. How accessible are these funds? What is the procedure to get them? If I Edward Makerere University, I don't know even how to get these funds. What about what people would call Muntu Wansi? How will you get access to these funds? Some of the conditions, they say you must have 25 hectares of planted trees and they should be indigenous to get the carbon fund. Perhaps my brother here will be able to tell us. So that can also be discouraging, that a small investor cannot be able to access that money.
And Professor, sticking with you before I come to Councillor Aaron, the excitement in tree planting, which Doctor was talking about, tree planting, tree growing, which I think he'll give us more on what the difference is. Excitement, I get my 100 by 100 and I'm planting trees, eucalyptus trees. It is the income at the end of the day that I'm thinking about, not really the cover.
Yeah.
So how do I find that balance, especially between the monetary element of it, but also the environment conservation at that?
Yeah, because when you know that there will be money after 10 years, you'll keep the trees. But you're growing the trees. I would say it has what we call a triple win. It is a triple win strategy. You are waiting for money, but at the same time you are conserving what? The environment. But if you know that there is no money tomorrow, you are going to clear what? The forest. And if the forest is cleared, then the environmental services it's providing would also be gone. So let us help the people that there is a benefit at the end. So when they are waiting for those 10 years or plus, these trees will be serving an environmental ecological function.
Professor, 10 years could be a stretch. Eucalyptus trees, I might be waiting 2 years, 5 years in between there because I want quick return from my investment there. How do I really find that balance, and what is the best tree to plant or to grow?
It depends on your objective. If your objective, you want money tomorrow, then you don't go into planting trees. Okay? If you are going to plant trees that you want money tomorrow, then that one is not going to work. But if you are an agriculturist and you have your land, you can have trees along the boundaries. They will be able to provide you with firewood. They may be able to provide you with fodder for your animals. Some trees can give you fodder. Or you could have also fruit trees, like the improved mangoes. Within 2 years, perhaps you may be able to start benefiting from those. So it depends on your objective, and then you can be guided on the right choice of trees to plant. You can't if you can't want money in 2 years and you are going for eucalyptus, or you are going for pines. Pines will take you a lot of time. But there could be some fruit trees you go for. There are also trees you plant, you get what? You get your fruits and you sell the market. You supply nutrients to your home, but at the same time sharing with what? With the other communities. And you are also trying to improve food security within your community or within the country. So these are some of the benefits we are talking about that may not necessarily be about cooling, about carbon sequestration, but it can also be a source of food. But also, when you have a plantation, you are providing labor to the surrounding community. They also have an income.
Thank you very much. Councillor Aaron, our reliance on fossil fuels, our reliance on charcoal, especially most of the homes in Uganda, our lack of, how to dispose plastic, polythene bags, doesn't this complicate our climate agenda? And what far-reaching effects do you foresee?
I think that's a very loaded question. But I think what you're clearly bringing out is what the global community is calling the triple planetary crisis. Not just the climate crisis, but also the pollution crisis, pollution and waste, and then the biodiversity loss, nature loss crisis. So we have biodiversity, we have climate, and we have pollution. All of these three crises coalescing around what you're talking about, the plastics, and then, of course, nature, and of course, the climate. Yeah, it's a huge crisis, and it creates, among the impacts, among the biggest impact is health. Health, people dying, more diseases coming in, including the ones caused by the heat waves, neurological diseases. Even these things multiply even cancer incidents. If it is about pollution, for example, the plastic crisis, which itself is an aggravation of the fossil fuel crisis, because 90% of plastics are actually emanating from fossil fuels. So the fossil fuels are not just globally hitting the climate system, but they are also feeding our rivers. There's plastics in people's breast milk. So children are suckling breast milk. Children are getting pollution right in their mother's wombs. And therefore you have young people struggling with cancer as a result of the air we breathe, which is polluted by microplastics and other pollutants. Effect on health is clear. Effect on food. With the climate crisis, we can grow less varieties of food crops, and those food crops we grow are damaged or weakened by the climate crisis. That's also, again, the effect on the economy. The food, the commercial crops are also failing because of the climate crisis. In West Africa, cocoa prices are skyrocketing because the yields are failing. The same situation will happen to coffee unless you have climate-resistant coffee seedlings. The same will visit tea. We need to rethink our agriculture to make it technology intensive and climate resistant in terms of what you grow should be able to withstand more rain, floods, and also more heat. Big challenge. So even the trees you grow, if you're really interested in environment and not just money, you don't just go around pine and eucalyptus. That's a tree plantation, it's not a forest. You need a mixed species trees. You need all these types of hardwood mixed with, or yes, you can put in eucalyptus, but it must be mixed. And then you have birds singing, you have snakes going around. All of these are very important. We may, you need rabbits in what you grow, but if you are just like what I saw on TV with wind blowing through, that is many things, it's just not forest. And for purposes of environment, we need mixed species. We need to do research and find out which trees indigenously grow in Buganda, in 𝐀𝐝𝐿, in 𝐷𝐸𝐿, and grow them, and they weren't one type of trees. There were many trees. And then we are able to get medicine from that kind of arrangement. Then we have better rainfall, and then we have better carbon sinks. Yeah, I work well with questions for clarifications. And don't let me to ramble on this.
Council, you know, some reports have come out and said that we might have passed the threshold that was discussed in the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees. Is that a true reflection of where we are, especially looking at the heat wave between June last year and now?
The quick answer is no. But what the science, the climate science, is that the window is rapidly closing. But we are not yet beyond even 1.5 degrees Celsius relative to pre-industrial times. But at 1.1 or 1.2, as some studies might suggest, it is precariously close. Of course, the solution has to be global because this is a global problem, but everyone must do their best. And don't be numbed by the global character of the problem. If you grow a tree, it will reduce on the effect, on the impact. Yes, if it gives you a shade that is local, you are seeing it. If you're getting a fruit tree, you are getting it. It will reduce on the food crisis in your home. So it's a global crisis, but the adaptation, which the government officials are talking about, is local, is mostly local. And the government of Uganda has prioritized, and not just government of Uganda, Africa has prioritized adaptation because of its negligent contribution to the climate crisis, which is an emissions crisis. So adaptation, how we live with the climate crisis, it is something that we can respond to locally, including at individual or home compound level that the good doctor was talking about. So we need to respond locally to this global phenomenon in the sense of living with it, but at a level of causation, at a level of mitigation, the global north, the big oil, the ExxonMobil, the big players, they have to stem their appetite for fossil fuels. The Arab countries, which are really largely dependent on oil, I'm happy they are trying to get to tourism and so on and so forth. The world just has to disabuse itself of its hunger, because the world at the global level is burning itself as it sees. The science is very clear.
And sticking with you, Council, before I get to Professor, is government doing enough? Because we know of an executive order, ban on charcoal, polythene bags. Is government doing enough, and what more can it do?
I will not answer the enough, but what more it can do is to increase the awareness about the problem. A program like this, we should have the whole day, not just 2 hours, because we have a climate crisis. People are treating a crisis as if it's a normal situation. People are not in a crisis mode. The last time we were in a crisis mode was in COVID, because COVID, I think, was killing rich people in a way that people were seeing, and therefore, but I don't see the panic in my government of Uganda, and indeed in many governments, not just the only government which is not panicking, but our house is on fire. We need to put in more energy, more awareness, and specifically as a lawyer, I want to see the Climate Change Act implemented and gazetted and an instrument come in. They pass this law, but they don't want it to be implemented. Yes, I've seen all other policies, but the Climate Change Act of 2021, it's about the time the Minister of Environment ensure that it commences so that us as civil society, then we have a legal tool with which to hold the specific government departments accountable. Then I can go to court and sue and say this company is contributing to this climate crisis depending on this science. So that is where they can actually do more. They pass the law, it is gathering dust. It's very unfortunate that a law passed to answer a climate crisis, the minister has not commenced it, ensure that it is commenced. It is his duty or her duty if the latest social has changed the sex of the environment minister. I don't know.
Professor Sarah, especially some young people that really, I am in my car, I drive from home to office in an SC, I sit in an SC office. This really could not be closer to home. It could feel like the whole panel is busy sensationalizing this whole activity here. How bad is it? How real is this, especially someone in the rural area, someone who is in the urban area? How real is this? Give us a real feel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Timothy. One thing that I've always said, or one story I like to recount, is that a few decades ago, the Karamoja dry winds, they call them the Karamoja easterlies, when they blew from Karamoja, they stopped somewhere around Bulambuli district, and they would blow for 1 month. 2 decades later, they blow all the way past Sironko, all the way past Timbali, and they last for 4 months, okay? And why is that possible? Because the whole tree cover went. So if you want an example of a local scenario where the environment has come home, that is one of it. And what does that imply? People cannot plant on time. Wind erosion and soil is carrying away all the soil. So, you know, we normally have soil erosion through water, but there's also soil erosion through the wind. People can't be outside their homes during the times of those winds because it's so dry, it's so dusty. It literally carries everything, even remaining shrubs. And of course, issues of drought, in that now people in those areas or in many rural areas which previously were very agricultural have to go closer to the swamp so as to be able to farm because there's not enough water to support the crops where they initially farmed them. Not many people can keep cows. So if you're talking about the situation getting closer to home, it has gotten home. People are aware. They're not aware, they are feeling it. But connecting the dots could be the challenge. Otherwise, of course, people say, what has happened to us? Then you see, then the sun is really shining so much, the rains have delayed to come, or the floods came, killed all the beans. But you see, you need someone to make the connections. But why is it difficult to make the connections in rural areas? Is one, I know in the districts, there's what they call the district forest officers, but that is not enough. In the past, we used to have people called forest rangers, or at least we read about them. There were forest rangers. Agriculture did have extension workers who are not there a lot these days, but at least we need extension workers in relation to forests. Otherwise, this business of having one forest ranger covering hectares of forest, that person cannot take on people who are destroying the environment, whether they are farmers or they are loggers or they are whatever. That is one challenge. We need some manpower where people consistently on a daily are educating people that why your crops are failing this time is because of this kind of activity, and therefore to stop this happening or to avert this calamity, we need to plant more trees. Because you see, people say now plant trees, now what? And there's not much, because again of the way life is lived, it's lived very much in temporal terms. There are also debates that, of course, there's the debate between the economy and the environment, and that you need a good economy to be able to protect the environment. So we end up with this thing being a chicken and egg, that you need an economy and a robust one to be able to protect the environment, which will also reinforce the economy and then reinforce welfare and that kind of thing. And of course, that kind of debate is one of the justifications why people destroy the environment. because we are poor, we need to destroy so as to be there. But we are seeing that actually, while it is benefiting a few people who are doing the destructive practices, most of the people are suffering the consequences other members have talked about. It could be crop failure, it could be diseases, it could be, just drought. If you can't find water and you have to walk longer distances to find water, if you can no longer farm, I think your whole livelihood is being changed. And why I insist on the advantage of having extension workers in forestry, that's when they would advise on what the members have said. Do we go exotic trees or we go local trees? And if we are to go local trees, do our population still remember what the local was? You see, everyone who wants to grow a tree near a riverbank will grow eucalyptus. And we know, and we have known for decades, the destructive effects of eucalyptus. Oh, that's fast growing, and I know we use it for electricity poles, so we need it. But do we need to grow it in the wetlands? I know it came largely to deal with that kind of thing in the, I think, 40s and 50s, long ago. But now we know enough knowledge that it is not good to plant eucalyptus in wetlands. So can we plant eucalyptus elsewhere and not in wetlands? But if you go to many rural areas, eucalyptus is in wetlands or on riverbanks. So that continues to suck out all the water. And then tomorrow people are saying, now the river has dried. So if we had an extension worker, he would advise on that. Of course, the problem with exotic plants is that they distort the ecological systems. They have not yet adapted to the area. They are not, sometimes they are not very resilient, but also many of them suck up a lot of water. We've talked about eucalyptus, but there are many other trees. Australia is very much on this thing because they are very much into controlling exotics because they have suffered the whole plight of exotic trees in their area. But beyond even the exotic trees, we also need to talk about exotic crops, okay? I know when we talk about exotic crops, people are quick to remind you that everything in Uganda today is exotic. But for goodness sake, why do Ugandans want to grow rice as a monoculture? We know there are areas in the world which are very good for rice, okay? But also Africa, including Uganda, we're also very good at certain things. But because our things are not very competitive on the global market, because we've not done value addition, we are all going for rice. So you find an area which used to grow bananas, there is a temporary swamp created so as to grow rice, okay? So everyone is into that. We know with rice comes a whole generation out of school because they have to scream at the birds. They have to do so many things to make the rice farm whatever. But all these new crops we are introducing, how do they cope with our ecosystem as opposed to the old traditional crops? And what do we need to do to sustain the old tribe? Because that's why we have a comparative advantage ecologically. But you know, we are not doing all that. So to go back to your question, of course, there's a whole problem. I know many rural areas, people are into rice because it brings quick money. But you look at the effect in real terms of the quick money, in terms of livelihoods, they remain poor. In terms of diseases, they increase bilharzia. If this is because the water is stable, so if you have bilharzia, it just grows. But also when you look at the survival, because all the rice is harvested and sold, so the homes still remain food insecure. And then whatever they are pumping in to make the rice grow, then destroys the water system. So I think we need someone on ground to enable our people to connect the dots. And as they connect these dots, also help them to engage in more sustainable practices. And I can give an example. People are interested in planting trees, but where do they find the good trees? Good Prof has talked about the tree nurseries in Kampala. But a lot of the destruction is upcountry. I know we've been parted to programs where, you know, you have to bring trees from Mukono, then take them miles away, but you are buying them. You have to do it on charity. Because you're not going to tell a rural person that, you know, then you have to give a tree of this type is 500 shillings and the transport will be another 200 shillings per tree. And at the end of the day, you have to take a seedling for 1,000. That may be too much for a rural household. But if we organize like in land cooperatives, in farm cooperatives, and how I wish these are some of the things our MPs prioritized, people would plant the trees and keep them. But they just don't know where to find them because the tree nurseries are very far away from where the rural person is. And of course, lastly, there's the whole issue of the agrarian system we have. If I have a small plot of land, And on that is where I have a house, and I also have to survive as a peasant. Then some of it has to go to trees. And I know that's why government in the past had a good program of avocados and mangoes. So those can do very well, but anything else will not be supported. And then lastly, as I was coming here, there's one thing, a place I passed, you know, Ginger Road? No, not Ginger Road, where Entebbe Road starts.
Yes.
Before you go to Queensway. They planted their trees, but they're just these tall. How I wished they had planted the old jacaranda trees, because they have a bigger shade and someone can sit. So I was looking at these very tall trees and wondering, so if the wind came, you know, they're just tall, they're thin, they look nice, but you have to plant very many of them to do the windbreaker system. Otherwise, they're just there. But if you had the jacaranda with branches interlocking, maybe it would be a better system.
Thank you very much. That has been the discussion, especially on what the effects and the impact looks like. Let's come back after this quick break to discuss solutions and how do we move forward from this and more after this break.
Fred!
Osmosis.
Freddy! Fred Dollar, my boss, CEO of Inojo, the general of generals, the conqueror of conquerors, the first and the final, the sky above the skies, the promised land, the terms and the conditions, the international king crocodile, the source of the
Osmosis.
the Nile.
I don't have money today.
Just take a polite loan of 200k to stock on my shop. The signs and symptoms of success. The bank commander, not the bank teller.
Why hassle for a loan when you've got MTN Momo? We're sorting. Use the Momo app or dial *165*5# for all quick loans. Choose from the different loan options from our partners and get one that works for you. Together, we're unstoppable.
The government of Uganda and the Uganda Bureau of Statistics is calling upon all stakeholders such as the chief administrative officers, city mayors, resident city commissioners, city clerks, city and division councillors, wards and LC chairpersons, as well as the residents and business communities to cooperate with the UBOS field teams as we embark on advanced preparations to conduct the National Population and Housing Census on the 10th of May 2024. The census will be a 10-day exercise to obtain statistical data and information that will be used for planning and policy formulation, including information on 1. How many we are, 2. Where we are, 3. How we are living, 4. What we own, and 5. Where we access services from. The Uganda Bureau of Statistics has now started listing of households and mapping in the 11 cities of Arua, Fort Portal, Gulu, Hoima, Jinja, Lira, Mbale, Masaka, Mbarara, Soroti, and in the Greater Kampala comprising of Kampala, Wakiso, and Mukono districts. For more information, please call 0755 342 128 or 0773 342 128. This message is brought to you by the Executive Director and Census Commissioner, Uganda Bureau of Statistics. Census 2024. It matters to be counted.
Are you planning or in the process of traveling abroad for work? Using irregular channels to find and travel for work abroad often seems cheaper and faster, but you risk being trafficked, mistreated, or forced to do work you did not agree to. Using proper channels is safer, offers more protection, and better access to support services when problems arise. Do not be deceived. Choose the proper channels. Always verify all information before traveling abroad for work by contacting the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, your local district labour office or DSOS office. You can also visit EEMIS website on eemis.mglsd.go.ug. This message is brought to you by the International Labour Organization with support from the Government of Switzerland.
Ebiseera by'okuzaayo abaana mu masomero tebiteekwa kukaluubiriza n'akatono. Eno kusimba nnyiriri mpanvu, kano kalipagano ka bidduka. Simanya kuzunga na banka siripsi. Kati kati osobola okusasula school fees z'omwana wo ate n'okola n'ebirala ntoko ku ssimu ye ey'omu ngalo. Ekikola kyangu nnyo. Nyiga bunyizi *165*8 ogoberera ebikulagiriddwa oba okozese app ya MTN Momo. Ate kati okola ki olwaleero? MTN Mobile Money Uganda Limited erungamizibwa banka enkulu eya Uganda.
Good evening and welcome to this last leg of Behind the Headlines. My name is 𝐀𝐝𝐝𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐧𝑠. I'm joined by Professor Sarah Council-Aaron. I'm joined by Professor Edward and finally Dr. Callist. And we're discussing everything the heat wave and what the solutions are. We have looked at the impact, its effects, and what could be if we don't do something about it. But now we want to be able to look at solutions. What can we do going forward? And Dr. Callist, I'll start with you, especially on policy. Why doesn't policy bite? Especially looking at some of the policies that you have mentioned, implementation. We have very good policies, but why don't they bite? Especially when you look at wetlands being degraded, filling them back there. Why are they not working? Why is implementation something difficult?
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, we have good policies, strategies. Implementation is something we need to scale up. But I just want to let the viewers know that actually good progress is being made. Let me just, for example, talk about the National Environment Management Authority. NEMA has actually been having less than 200 staff. And obviously, if we are going to police the environment all over the country, you need environment police. We have actually been having very, very few enforcers, but right now NEMA has been scaled up. Government has improved the manpower of NEMA. Right now the NEMA will be having close to 1,000 staff. Now NEMA has created regional offices. NEMA was operating largely within Kampala, and obviously it would become a problem for you to enforce and support the local governments. Right now there is a whole department headed by actually somebody who was in the army previously that is leading the enforcement. So we are scaling up. And right now, for wetlands, for example, each wetland now is being manned by somebody who has been specifically hired and recruited to be there to ensure that the wetland is protected. So some of the challenges we have been faced with were largely related to human resource capacity, but also the financial resources. But right now, government is actually improving all of that. And we are seeing big difference. Right now, Ugandans could have already started seeing a lot of action being taken. Now, the other challenge we always face is when you arrest somebody who has committed an environmental crime, and you take that person to our usual courts, it is very, very difficult to prove beyond reasonable doubt that this person is the one who has committed the crime. And that's why the Ministry of Water and Environment is working very, very closely with the judiciary to set up an environment court. A court manned by judges, by prosecutors who understand the law and also can preside over these crimes. Right now, we have a number of cases in court. Some have been won, but others have been lost. Again, because you are dealing with a situation that is not friendly to the environment. So setting up environment court is going to help. Last week, we had the Deputy Chief Justice actually confirming to us that they're in advanced stages establishing this environment court, and it will make a very, very big difference. So the human resource capacity, the financial resources, the court, you are going to see more and more enforcement coming on board. But the other thing, of course, also is you need the local governments to be capacitated. I think the colleagues here have already mentioned, if we have one environment officer to look after a whole district, it becomes very difficult. And that's why right now we are beefing up the local governments right now. More staff are now being recruited to man the natural resources, environment, forest, but also through the parish development model. We also have an environmental component where we want to make sure that the people give more attention to environment. So a number of actions are being taken. Now when, for example, you look at the colleague talked about the Climate Change Act, just to mention that we are making very good progress. You know, once you have a law in place, you have to ensure that you put in place the necessary ingredients for it actually to be implemented. Number one, you have to raise awareness so that people understand the provisions of the law. You have to develop regulations to ensure that you enforce the law. So right now, we have developed regulations that are being finalized by Ministry of Justice so that we have the tools to be able to enforce the law. But also we are building capacity. You need people. You can have the law and you declare that it is in operation, but do you have the capacity? Do people understand? The people are supposed to enforce. So we are moving along different fronts, but we are also looking at incentives. For example, right now, we want people to plant trees, to grow trees, so that they can get money out of it. We are developing regulations for carbon credit. Right now, many Ugandans actually have been cheated. People come and they say, oh, you have planted, you have a forest, we are going to buy carbon credits from you. We have not been having rules of the game. So we have now developed regulations. They are now being finalized by Ministry of Justice, and very soon they will come in place, and then people then will have an incentive to plant trees, to grow trees, so that they can get money. But all our programs now have a livelihood component. We do believe, and again colleagues have mentioned, that we are dealing with poor people. And now we want them to protect the environment, but also we want to make sure that they benefit from the environment. We have put in place an initiative, an innovation, where we are creating water and environment cooperatives. For example, around wetlands, we are now creating cooperatives so that people look at the wetland as a resource. We are supporting them to create businesses. And the number of wetlands, right now we have 15 water and environment cooperatives we have created in the country. It's initial stages, but they are showing promise. People now are looking after these resources because they are getting incomes out of them. For example, I just give an example, one wetland in Ntungamo. That wetland had been highly degraded. We struggled actually to have it restored. But that wetland was restored after extensive engagement with the people. Now we have created many jobs along the value chain. The wetlands is back. For us, it's storing the water. It is maintaining a microclimate. But people are cutting papyrus from a wetland. Those are jobs. We're having people transporting the papyrus, and they are mulching banana plantations. So if you look at the jobs created along the value chain, there are many. But those people are getting the jobs, are the ones who are actually looking after the weather. So we are innovating. We are not doing things the usual way, but of course, a lot more innovations are needed. And that's why, as the Minister of Water and Environment, annually, we organize what we call the Uganda Water and Environment Week.
Which was last week.
Last week. And our theme was rethinking collective action. We feel that every Ugandan has to come on board and play his or her role. But also we're looking at innovative solutions, that we need to innovate. And we innovate with academia, we innovate with the private sector, we innovate with the civil society, with the cultural institutions, with the religious institutions, with everybody. And that's why the Ministry of Water and Environment is mobilizing all the stakeholders, and we are signing a memorandum of understanding. Right now, we're about to sign one with Makerere University to get the academia to bring that knowledge and help the people on the ground. We have one with the Buganda Kingdom, we have one with the Toro Kingdom, the Businga Zulu, we're about to sign one with the Unyoro Kingdom, with the Busoga Kingdom. The idea again is the cultural institution can give you mileage. We have signed one with also the religious institutions. So we are moving out to get the stakeholders, to bring in the expertise, to bring their capacities, and we feel that we make a big difference once we get everybody on board. And when we talk about implementing the policies, again, we feel that once we bring all these stakeholders together, we'll be able to move forward. As we mobilize resources, we need also to get these stakeholders to work together, because I think the challenge we have had as a country, we really work in silos, and we don't take advantage of the capacity. We don't leverage available resources and capacities. And we feel that once we bring all this together, I think we'll move forward the country, and we'll do much more, because we are not short of experience, we are not short of ideas, we are not short of knowledge. So we are trying to harness all that we have in the country to be able to move forward and get the country where it's supposed to be.
And I'm glad you spoke about silos, and that's where I would like to put emphasis, especially on the strategies, policies. Do the policies and strategies of the different ministries interact, especially when we talk about settlement of Ugandans, housing, when we talk about industrialization, agriculture? Do your ministries interact, especially when you're creating these policies, these strategies? Because climate change, is real right now?
Yes, actually, right now, if you look at the policies and the laws, you don't see much contradiction. And one of the, I think the challenge you have as a country, well, Ugandans, we are generally people who want to work alone. And I think we need to change our mindset. We have good policies, we have good laws, they are not contradictory, but it is us as individuals to actually implement them. And
Doctor,
that's why...
Just to jump in there, Councillor Aaron is here. Bugoma Forest is one of the things he has been chasing, I think, the last 2-3 years. When we talk about habitation, settlement, and then we talk about the Ministry of Environment, your policies seem to be in ISOs and not interacting to solve Ugandan problems.
Well, I think Council has also been working with some of the government agencies actually with him. So to me, I think the issue is who is doing what and why. Sometimes what we are doing are not necessarily premised on the policies. But also, of course, also need to bear in mind, I think a professor talked about the land tenure system. That we're having challenges, and sometimes the land tenure system dictates what you do. If, for example, somebody has the forest on his land, there is very little you can do. You can deal only with those which are in Central Forest Reserve by government. So again, this is where we are saying, can the stakeholders come on board and put in pressure? Because if one institution is not working with the other, can we get the other stakeholders to come on board and put us under pressure so that we all face the same direction? So sometimes what we do is not necessarily premised on the law, on the policies, and where policies are contradictory, I think we have mechanisms to address them. So to me, I wouldn't say the policies are contradictory or the laws. I think we have mechanisms through which we can resolve those contradictions. But at the heart of it is the individuals. And I think as individuals, we need to change our mindset and do the right things for Uganda so that Uganda can actually get to where it's supposed to be.
Thank you very much. Professor Edward, when you hear the interaction of policy, and I'll leave policy at that, let me come to the forests and innovation for you there. What more practical solutions can we innovate to be able to see that we have a safe environment, we have a country that is for posterity, and not one that stays with just us?
My brother, what you have realized that it is good you said forestry, but I want also to bring in some of the ecological terms. We are in an ecosystem, and every component matters. Uganda, we are talking about policies, but there have been people before us who have said that, okay, for example, the late Mwalimu Julius Nyerere said his policies were good, but the implementation was what? Was poor. And what bedevils our country are the vested interests. When they were going for decentralization, some of the forest reserves were decentralized. They became local forest reserves, thinking that if the local people are empowered, the local governments are empowered, they will manage these forest reserves better. But we have come to realize that most of the challenges, most of the forests which have been lost are those ones which have been under what? The local government, because of vested interests. Forest reserves have been taken over for other activities. So we fail to manage the forest reserves or to change land use in a more acceptable manner. And at times we don't have the evidence. We don't have evidence-based decision making. That yes, you want people to build here, so what happens to the forest? How do you compensate for that loss? That doesn't matter. But also, what you have to look at, Makerere University, I think with my sister, Professor Sarah Sali here, we have to thank the government of Uganda because it has provided us with the funds. And we are using these funds to look for solutions to help this country develop. So one of the challenges has been that people are not generating knowledge and innovations, but now we have been helped by the government to provide, it has provided some money which you can use to find solutions to some of our problems. And for my department, there have been a number of innovations coming out through there. We have also tried to look at some of the solutions which can be triple win strategies to some of our problems. Like now we are looking at the roadside nurseries. We believe that these roadside nurseries, if the people managing them have the skills and have the right knowledge to manage them, they can be good businesses, sustainable businesses. They can help to provide materials for greening our cities. They can provide materials for those people who are establishing their own compounds, so that they have the right plants to plant there, give them food, but give also other environmental services. We believe that if that is done properly, then we shall be solving some of the problems.
And I'm glad you have spoken about forestry and what needs to be done. And I'll give you a practical example.
Yeah.
Got someone took him to some property in Kalangala, tried to look at it to see, but forestry or agroforestry is expensive. For Omuntu Wawansi, as Professor Sarah was saying, it's not cheap for you to be able to do that. I want to be part of the environment conservation, but it's expensive.
I don't know why people think that agroforestry is expensive. Agroforestry, we are saying you are including trees on the land in a mixture with other crops you grow. People who are growing cocoa, they are practicing agroforestry, most of them, because you need the shade to have a better productive plot for your cocoa. The people who are growing coffee, they need trees interplanted with the coffee. So without the trees, then you can't have a good coffee production. So really, I think people have to understand agroforestry. Agroforestry, we have various practices, but what is essential here to understand is that, are you including trees on your land as you grow other crops? They could be on the boundaries. The trees could be on the boundaries. You plant the trees. They could provide you with the fodder. Some of them could be medicinal plants. Yeah. So to me, agroforestry is not expensive. What perhaps we would be calling would be very expensive is establishing forestry plantations. Establishing forest plantations is very expensive, because if you are going to plant eucalyptus, plant pines, you need an investment every year. You need to buy to ensure that the compound, the plantation is weeded. You control termites for eucalyptus. It is not, and that costs a lot of money, and you are not getting any immediate returns. So that's why it becomes expensive. But for the other types of agroforestry, I think we need to go for those ones. I know people should not be scared of including trees on their land, whether they are growing maize, whether they are growing bananas. They need trees.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Aaron, you used something that amused Professor, boiling earth. What are the remedies for this boiling earth?
Oh, the remedies are already actually stated in the law, in the Paris Climate Agreement, and it's what they call approaches. The major one is mitigation approaches. Those ones that limit or prevent greenhouse gas emissions. In the language of nature-based solutions, that the good doctor said, among them are really huge forests. At a global level, we are talking about the Amazon, the Congo forest, and other forests across the world that suck in and store carbon instead of emitting it in the atmosphere and leading to global heating. Oceans and other wetland systems are major carbon sinks. So their health is very important because they store a lot of carbon. We need to stop deforestation, because when we do deforestation, we turn carbon sinks or stores of carbon into carbon emitters. So the carbon that is being stored gets emitted, and you will have more heat waves, more landslides, more earthquakes, more crop failures, and so on and so forth. And we are all, that is at the mitigation level. At the adaptation level, again, the same forest you are talking about, the same wetland will help you cope or live with the vagaries, the consequences of the climate crisis, in a sense that they will reduce the heat, They will regulate the wind. They will slow down the flood, contain it. Every imaginable consequence of climate change, whether it is flood, drought, unpredictable weather patterns, especially precipitation or rain, it can be helped by taking care of our nature, what we call nature-based solutions, including our wetlands, our mountain ecosystem, anything that God has given us. We can throw it at the problem, and even if it doesn't reduce it, or solve it completely, it will reduce its impact on us. And of course, that also includes the tree growing. Not only planting trees, but ensuring that they actually grow. The quality, the nature of trees also matters. Ideally, indigenous trees. If you even Googling can help you actually find out what trees were indigenous in this area and which of those are climate resistant. Then you grow them. But of course, NFA is there to advise on that, and other government agencies on the nature of trees. Using water responsibly, using power responsibly. This idea of like sleeping with the lights on, switch off if you're not using power. Don't let the taps run recklessly. The taps running. We have to be responsible users of water, because countries will soon go to war over water. Did you know that Ethiopia and Egypt were about to go to war in our time? Now, our children will not be fighting over anything else other than climate conditions, other than things like water. Like this river Nile, it's a subject of many arguments. So for you, if you are there wasting water, thinking that water is something that, because Uganda is somehow blessed, no, even the water we have is not for us alone. We have to share it with people who are drought-stricken perennially. So, but also it has a role, actually an outsized role in terms of climate, because most of the carbon is stored in water, in wetlands, in oceans. So we need to use it. The general consumption patterns must reduce. This idea of for example, dressing, every time I have to buy, that I need to buy a suit. No, the fashion industry is also responsible for a lot of carbon emissions. So you need to, even dressing second-hand clothes is okay. Even sharing, like giving out clothes that you don't have. Like a lot of common things are good for the environment.
And I'm glad you have spoken of really things that I can do personally, we can be able to do.
Yes.
Manage my water, electricity, and all these things.
Cycling, so that you don't have to, you are healthier, but also you are not having to ride a car. Using public means of transport. All those are climate solutions, but we need to do them in mass, en masse, in a big enough numbers to create a problem. But as an individual, those are things you can do. You can avoid using single-use plastic. So that we use this. That's why I'm carrying this, so that I don't have to drink water in a single-use plastic. This, Timothy, must stop. We cannot have it here. You get me?
Council, let me stay with you before I come to Professor. As we all know, at some point, landslides will happen in this country when the heavy rain is coming. Then, fortunately, on this panel, we have no members of parliament. But then there's the politicization of such incidents, pointing fingers at government, what it hasn't done. How do we insulate environment and climate from politics?
That is very difficult. But when you talk about the landslides, last year, many people died in one area which is divided by colonialists. Many people died in 𝐀𝐝𝐴, and in Congo and in Rwanda, around the same area. Died, I'm not saying suffered, just died. Houses were buried, and part of it, of course, is denuding. It has been happening in Kasese. When you strip the Rwenzori of its forest cover, the next day, people around Rwenzori die because stones roll down and so on and so forth. Yes, so the same thing in 𝐀𝐝𝐴. 𝐀𝐝𝐴's for it was really degraded a long time ago. And yes, there are people populating many, all the hills in 𝐀𝐝𝐴 are populated. So erosion takes place. There are no windbreakers, no flood regulators. I mean, it's like wind coming and you don't have that necktie or that jacket on and the shirt on. It will hit you very badly. So we need our mountains covered, replanted, reforested. But the politics you're talking about, it is inevitable in this climate discourse, except that we need good politics. The bad politics is the one which is problematic. And while you are in government, you are going to be criticized. The government should not deflect criticism by saying this is politics. Yes, government does politics, so it shouldn't stay away from politics. But politicians must know that we need them legislating, we need them holding power actors to account, asking them not just the service awards and per diems, but asking that where, in which district are you maintaining this forest? Why is the forest in your district, in your constituency, degrading? Why are you not raising awareness? Where is the climate finance going to the universities, going to the, when are we having those 1,000 people promised in NEMA actually on the ground, properly enumerated? Why is it that we have our military, instead of protecting our forest, guarding the deforesters, such as in Bugoma and this other forest, Zoka forest, which Amanzori is always talking about. So the politics, it has to be there because it's about governance, and what we want is good environmental governance. Okay. What we want is environmental rule of law. What we want is accountability, is public participation, is transparency in managing natural resources.
Thank you very much. Professor, especially when we look at both agriculture, food security, and we also look at most of last year and the year before, inflation, biggest contributor to it was food. How do we ring-fence agriculture and food security from these effects of climate change?
I don't know whether actually they can be ring-fenced from the effects of climate change, because you need a good environment for agriculture and the other things to survive. So I think that may be a little bit difficult because climate change will definitely affect agriculture. So you cannot ring-fence it. But I think what you need to do is to help people to engage in sustainable agricultural practices. And this is where I talked about connecting the dots. How can we enable our people do the right thing? And for starters, maybe I want to say the poor people are not really the problem, but I think the richer people load it on the poor people. Okay, in rural areas, a poor person is farming in a very inefficient way, that's different. In urban areas, it's we who build on hills, we drain the wetlands, and then of course, because we've paved our compounds, that water goes for the poor people in the slums. So poor people are not always to blame. I think they bear the brunt of some of our bad practices. The person who is doing a lot of agriculture in rural areas, grabbing people's land and squeezing the people to smaller plots of land, is in a way causing a problem. So then you have the big forests being cut down to create space for agriculture. I think that is also a problem. I think you cannot divorce the two, but we need people to engage in the right practices. And that's where you also need the good politics. For starters, we must note that the people who started talking, politics was the vehicle for the initial environmental activism in the 50s. What used to happen is how the US government debated issues of the environment in Congress shaped how activists organized around that. And that's why actually environmental protection, climate change became a political issue, which determined whether people would vote a particular president or not. And when you look at US history and environmental protection or climate things, you realize which presidents actually came on and destroyed more, and which presidents have come on. And so you can trace the performance of climate change issues, whether positively or negatively, to particular reigns and particular presidents. There are those who were fully neoliberal, fully enterprise, who never believed there was any issue to do with the environment. And indeed, because of the economic thing, you had even environmental evidence of environmental destruction, evidence of climate change being either massaged or actually destroyed by certain presidents putting in positions, key positions of these offices, people who were actually people coming from the fossil fuel industry, like from the ExxonMobils and the rest. So politics and politics will always be a good vehicle to address environmental change if we give them the right mandate or if we demand that they do the right thing. What happened in COP28 recently was about politicians meeting to discuss. It was not, of course, on the sidelines, you had the scientists and the whatever, but those commitments can only be made at political level. So environmental things, climate change will always be a political issue. He talked about the ministry and us hiring more NEMA people. That can only be a political decision which drives the budget. If you don't have the right people to say we need this as a key issue, you'll never have the budget. You'll continue saying we need NEMA people, you'll continue having 20, when actually you could have 1,000. But to go back to the question you're saying is, agriculture, in as much as it is about plants and about animals, is very much part and parcel of the ecosystem, okay? I know right now there is this whole debate that animals are great contributors to greenhouse gases. So there's the whole movement to promote peas and the pigeon peas. So if you see a lot of the science going into peas and soya, it's because they're trying to shift the world away from animals, okay? So in future, we might be told, you know, don't raise cows and don't raise goats because these are contributing to greenhouse gases. But again, it's the way the US beef industry is run. Maybe if the US beef industry was run in a more sustainable manner like is happening in other parts of the world, there wouldn't be much of a problem. So we need to see what is the kind of science which is going into agriculture. If you're talking very much pushing GMOs, pushing monocultures, pushing exotic crops, you're actually going to destroy the environment because some of those things have not evolved naturally in those environments. Some of those crops come and take away. Actually, they destroy other things they find. And when the projects for those things end, like right now I think rice is being really driven by World Bank and the Ministry of Water and that kind of thing in the wetlands. When those projects end, they just leave behind environmental waste, environmental disaster. Then the community is wondering, okay, so which is the next project coming? Okay? So you get people away from having a sustainable mindset to being dependent on which project is coming with what, and yet what they are being given is worse than what they had. Can we try to rejuvenate and grow what we have? Because I cannot be convinced that with all the years we've done rice farming, we are the biggest exporters of rice on the global market. We are not even competing with the Pakistans and the India. So what is it we are doing? But if we put our agriculture scientists to task to grow what we have, to multiply it to whether it's the bananas, the cocoyam, the cassava, the whatever, couldn't we have a competitive advantage? For example, in Uganda, what's our competitive advantage in terms of crop production? It can't be we give away everything for rice and then we destroy and put a lot of pollutants in that. So if in case, okay, what you're saying really what we need to do, maybe we need to have an inventory of what things look like and then see, in the past was it called PMA, Plan for Modernization of Agriculture, it had a secretariat which used to zone what was good and what was suitable for certain areas. I know there's a secretariat in Wandegea. I don't know how functional it is. Can it be reactivated to come back and do this? But in all intents and purposes, we can go for agricultural practices which are sustainable. I know the president talks about the 4-acre model, but where everyone has a role. Agricultural production should not be one person zoning off square miles and then pushing everybody to the periphery. Then you're going to create many people coming to squat in the slums and encroach on the swamps in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas, you keep a certain level of peasantry producing in a very ineffective way, in a very food insecure way, and that does not help anyone.
Professor, how do we get a multi-sectoral approach to this? Private sector, civil society, that everyone is galvanized, that we are all aiming to one goal to ensure that we have an environment that is conserved?
Thank you. I think one problem we have suffered as part of our neoliberal legacy is everything is everybody's problem. Society doesn't work like that. We call that collective action problems. A collective action problem is a problem where everyone needs to cooperate to resolve a matter, but actually no one cooperates because of interests. So, pardon? Because of vested interest. So at the end of the day, the politician will not want to risk his votes. So he's not going to tell people, don't farm like this, don't do that. Like in the case we're talking about of 𝐀𝐝𝐝𝐫𝐞𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐧𝑠. 𝐀𝐝𝐝𝐶𝐝 didn't have landslides when we had terrace bands. But and in the past, in the history of 𝐀𝐝𝐶, if you destroyed a terrace band, because that's almost someone's garden, if you destroyed a terrace band, there were heavy sanctions for it. But the more we became political, every 5-year cycle, you can actually pull down someone's terrace band with no consequences, or with very little consequences. But in the past, you could even go to jail for 5 years, okay? So now there's no terracing, therefore we have the landslides, but before we had the landslides, we had bean wilt problems because I think the water would go in and seep, and I don't know, the beans would die and do whatever. So you have a lot of erosion. So collective action problems are not anyone's responsibility. So this thing of thinking, I am going to do my thing, like we're going to choose not to have a suit, then the other one is going to choose to have an avocado, the other one to have a mango, and then we appeal to everyone to have a very good mindset, is not the best way to do development. There is a reason why a state exists. If we go back to the history of the state and the evolution of the modern state as we understand it, it was after a 500-year war in the UK, where people then understood that actually freedom for everybody and everybody being free to do their thing was a recipe for chaos, okay? So to resolve the chaos, then you talk about a social contract where then they agreed that, okay, for the purposes of stability and peace, we are going to have a certain level, a certain layer above us to moderate us. That's why we have the state. So the state has done well to have these policies, which we've been told are fragmented and are in different areas. And we were told that if people don't cooperate on these, stakeholders should come in. But these are state policies. The state has to move in. I know in the past, environment looked like everyone's problem, but now it's a big problem. We are having a heat wave, yet as a country, we have not evolved to a level of everyone having AC. Okay? We don't know tomorrow what will have. Of course, I know whenever we had landslides, we move people from Obududa, you take them to Bulambuli, you take them to Kiriandongo, or wherever I want to take them. I don't know the ones from 𝐀𝐝𝐶 where we are going to take them in case the landslides continue. We might take them to Masindi. But with the time and with population increase, moving people like that is not going to be sustainable. So we need to look ahead and see this as a potential disaster, as a potential crisis. And those who are in charge should enforce the policies they have put in. It cannot be free will for everybody. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Council, let me come to you. Many especially of the land friend, talk about climate justice, climate justice. What is this climate justice that you want to see?
Okay, so by climate justice, we mean putting human rights and equity at the center of climate action. And it's a term that is used more so at a global level, so that the vastly responsible for emissions developed north pays
the price,
for polluting for the climate crisis under the principle of polluter pays and other principles of environmental law. And also, so that's one leg, that the biggest contributors provide the solutions, including climate finance, which was well explained, but also to ensure that the people who are worst hit, because one demonstration of climate injustice is that it hits the least contributors. Yeah, Africa contributes negligent around between 3 to 3.5% of the climate crisis, but it and other poor countries suffer the biggest consequences. And even in Africa, the rich can get away with it largely but the poorest of the poorest continent suffer most, die most, whatever imaginable consequences. And that goes even into age groups. The children are suffering even more. And then gender, women who have to fetch water to travel long distances, who have caregiving roles, suffer the most. So that is a lot of climate injustice. But there is also an aspect of public participation. So that in these policies that they are talking about, the people participate in framing the policies so that they own them, they understand them, and they help in their implementation. So climate justice, it helps us with remedies to the climate crisis. So injustices, if there is a problem, if there is a loss and damage, we can use even the courts, we can use the multilateral framework to try to find a solution. The person who is dead will not come, but can I get compensation? The way someone dies of a road accident and I go to court and get compensation for, can I get compensation for people whose death is attributable to the climate crisis? Right now, as a form of climate injustice, there is nowhere you are going to run. They will think that it is God. No, it's not God. It is fossil fuels.
Okay. Professor Edward, even as we draw to a close, a lot of innovations have been done by Macquarie. And on this panel, I'm always excited when Professor Sarah or anyone from Macquarie is invited. The salt is too concentrated in one area. At what point do we begin to test this salt out of the institution?
I think the mandate of Macquarie University is teaching, research, and the community outreach. And I think we have been intentional in our community outreach. I think during the period of COVID, the lot of innovation is coming from Macquarie University, which were aimed at trying to help communities cope with the impacts of COVID. There were hand washing equipment, there were also the ventilators. These ones are taken to the community. We share with the communities to ensure that, because we are doing it for Macquarie, we are doing it for the community. So it is always a requirement that our innovations are taken to the people.
Thank you very much. Finally, Doctor, funding is one of the things that I have heard you talk about, and something that has been said by some of the panelists here. There are 1,000 NEMA enforcement that you have got there. How far with raising funding, and also how do you incentivize people that are in agroforestry to stay there?
Thank you very much. Again, if I can relate to what you mentioned about the international negotiation on climate change. Each country is required to develop a strategy, a climate change strategy called National Determined Contribution. Uganda has a national climate change strategy which has highlighted what we need to do to adapt to impacts of climate change, but also take mitigation actions. So we have identified sectors where mitigation actions need to be taken and where adaptation action needs to be taken. So again, the country has consolidated its strategic direction, but we are moving forward to develop specific adaptation plans. We are developing right now a national adaptation plan. We are also right now, Ministry of Agriculture has developed an adaptation plan for agriculture. Ministry of Health is about to complete. We have initiated a development of the water national adaptation plan. So different sectors are developing their action plans so that they are able to guide the country and also the stakeholders on what action needs to be taken. And those plans are now the ones we will be using to mobilize financing. Now, for example, if we have an adaptation plan for agriculture, then we are highlighting the things we need to do to be able to adapt impacts of climate change from agriculture. For example, one of them will be improving water storage and irrigation. Now, those are the plans now we are using to mobilize resources. If we have a plan for example, protection of the environment, then we are identifying action that we need to sell to the partners to be able to get money. In the Ministry of Water and Environment, we have realized that we cannot continue looking for funding from the traditional sources. We have developed a strategy on innovative financing strategy. For example, we are saying that we have the private sector. Many of the private sector organizations actually depending on this resource, but they are impacted by climate change. Right now we have, for example, programs that are funded by the beer brewing companies, Nile breweries, Uganda breweries. We have, for example, a program running out of trees. Uganda breweries is funding it so that we can improve tree cover, because if we don't improve tree cover, then they will be affected. 95% of beer is water. 96% of soda is water. So if there is no water, then you are not talking about any beer brewing or soda making. So we are also ensuring that we identify funding from, for example, climate financing. Government created a climate finance unit, Ministry of Finance, basically to guide the country on how we can tap into these resources. It is already having programs to build capacity by the stakeholders on how we can prepare projects to tap into these resources. It's not easy to get climate financing. Some of the projects we have in the ministry, sometimes we take 2 years or 3 years before you get the money. So the climate finance unit, working with our climate change department, the ministry, are helping the stakeholders to tap into these resources. So we are getting those who already have the capacity to help the others, and we want to ensure that we do them in terms of collaboration. We're identifying also funding, for example, from these foundations. Again, those sources that we have not looked into, carbon credits, of course, we are talking about them. So financing now needs to come from different sources, government being number one, but also our development partners, but also those who are affected. We're also looking even at private companies which have corporate social responsibility, and we want them to go beyond corporate social responsibility to ensure that actually they provide the resources we need. So we are putting in place those frameworks, and we feel that they will help us to improve the way we are doing things. If, for example, we have, as we say, restoration plans, they have to be implemented, and those are the kind of monies that we need from all of these different sources. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me read some feedback before I give you your parting shots there. I see Steve sends in a message and says, good evening, Timothy. Thank you for the show. Very insightful on some of the things you're saying there. I appreciate them. I wish government would implement some of them. Okay. I'll go on to read one from Citizens Concern Africa. Thank you for the insightful discussion. The current heat wave only underscores the urgency of climate crisis. Let us unite, adapt, and minimize loss and damage. Embracing renewables, conserving resources, supporting climate resilience are crucial. Educating, advocacy, engaging for change, and every small action makes a difference. Okay? One more so that we can be able to call it an evening comes in from Robert Triachera, who says, I appreciate everything that is discussed there on the panel, but I wish government can also listen to some of the things that they're doing, especially the multi-sectoral approach needs to be aligned for all of them to see what is happening. As a country, we have committed ourselves to reduce our greenhouse emissions by 24.7, but we need about $28.1 billion to do this. Where is the money? Climate financing is still a big problem, and thank you for the show. Okay, thank you very much. I'll start with Professor Sarah, Council Aaron, Professor Edward, and finally Dr. 𝐀𝐝𝐝 on your parting shots.
Thank you very much, Timothy. It has been a great discussion, but I must say, I don't want to say the journey is just beginning, because people have been on it, but the journey continues. And as it continues, I think I would just like to emphasize a few things, 3 things. One, can we have an inventory of what our ecological zones have been like? I know we have the botanists have an inventory for the trees, but can also have an inventory of what these land systems and land places looked like. Because you go to some place and they tell you there used to be a river here, there used to be a lake here. Yeah. Like where we now have the Mbale Industrial Park, that place used to be a lake. But now we have we thank God for the industrial park, but you know sometimes when it floods like there's never been a park. So you have that. The second thing is, we are talking a lot about land and trees and other things and agriculture, but we also need to explore other ways we can benefit from the environment. Ecotourism, ecologies, these things are there. Many Africans, we have been told, many local Ugandans are not into these things. They've been left to white people. But probably this is another sector Ugandans need to pick in beyond Mr. Wekesa, so that people appreciate the environment just beyond food production. And lastly, policy needs to be harmonized, and the culture of working together needs to be strengthened. And I think at government level, the different sectors that relate with the environment need to pull together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council?
Few points. One, we must stop fighting nature and start healing nature, because it has most of the solution to the crises we are dealing with, be it the climate crisis, the pollution, and the biodiversity loss. Two, we need to scale up, or we need to increase and expand the awareness drives in the villages and schools, especially among the young people, because they are our source of hope. They have the energy, they have the ideas and innovation we are looking for to battle this crisis. Then thirdly, and especially to government, policies, even the best policies cannot deliver a solution. It is action that does, so we need to implement our policies. Uganda does not have a policy problem. We have among the best laws, the best policies in the world. What we are lacking is action on those policies. If we implement our policies, which are good, we shall be good.
Thank you. Professor Edward?
Yeah. For me, from the side of Makerere University, I think we are committed to supporting government actions, because we have to provide the evidence, and they have to learn that these days we don't just have come up with the policies, but they should be evidence-based. And we are placed better to provide that evidence. But also, my brother talked about increasing the number of employees in NEMA, but I don't think that's going to be the solution. Our major concern and our major problem is vested interest. You may have their 1,000, but with the vested interest, if we don't work on it, we are not going anywhere. Because Nyerere said that the policies were good, but the implementation was poor. And let us support the people or the stakeholders who are investing in ensuring that we have a better environment. That's what I can say.
Thank you very much. Finally, Doctor.
Yes, thank you very much. On behalf of government, I really would like to mention that Uganda is our country, and unless we want to locate to other countries, and the ball is in our court as Ugandans, we need to take action. Otherwise, we will not be there. So we need to come to the basics and stop lamenting and stop the blame game and play our role, and one by one we'll make a difference. I must say, a lot is being done in this country, but I think we don't have a good inventory of what is being done. I know Makerere University is doing a lot of innovations. How many Ugandans know about them? In the Ministry of Water and Environment, we're having many, many innovative programs, and I know other government agencies. I think we need to work closely together and take advantage of our cooperative capacities and also leverage on what is already working. Good innovations are going on the ground. If we move on the ground, we need to scale them up. And I think the time for complaining, the time for lamenting, I think is not there. Already the heat wave has shown us that even when you are complaining, it will go with you. And climate change is here. Let's be positive. Let's be positive. I think, as has been mentioned, let's call upon those who are derailing the progress to come forward. And I think we use the people who hold each one of us accountable so that we are able to do what is needed. Otherwise, we are ready to work with all the stakeholders, and I want to invite everybody to come and work with us at the Ministry of Water and Environment. We are open to collaboration and coordination, and we feel we are stronger working together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the team behind the production team that has ensured that we have a successful show, from my producer to the people behind the cameras and operating them there. I want to thank you very much for also you participating in the show, that you have sent messages. We couldn't read all of them, but we are really grateful for them. Gentlemen and lady, I really appreciate you coming through and gracing us on our invite there. We'll end it this way. Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not enough for every man's greed. Good morning.
hear it? Do you see it?
In Uganda, Tanzania.
That's the sound of business in a developing economy.
For UBC News,
Charlotte Amuge in Kampala.
Catch the weekly business roundup every Saturday at 8:30 p.m. only on UBC TV, inspiring Uganda.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
One-on-one with Michael Jordan Lukomwa.
A weekly face-to-face conversation focusing on accountability, inspiration, information, and sensitization of the public from the various sources, such as inspirational profiles.
Having a disability is not inability.
Professional guidance.
There is no special antiretroviral therapy that is given specifically for discordant couples.
And of course, politics.
Don't you see anywhere that you would give a credit in the fight against COVID?
My role as the owner of the country is not to, be preoccupied by giving credit to my servant.
We have said that if we are to talk to General Museveni, there must be certain conditions in place.
Is it true that you paid 5 million shillings to MPs that voted for Anita Mong and Tayebo?
That is laughable. Why would we pay when we have nominated them as SEC?
Every party has been represented in Uganda's parliament for 10 years. We only by one MP, you yourself and my daughter, Susan.
Every Friday 9 p.m. it's One-on-One with Michael Jordan Lukomwa on UBC TV, inspiring Uganda.
Fred!
Osmosis.
Freddy! Fred Dollar, my boss, CEO 𝐏𝐸𝐴𝐺𝐿, the general of generals, the conqueror of conquerors, the first and the final, the sky above the skies, the promised land, the terms and the conditions, the international king crocodile, the source of the Nile.
I don't have money today.
Just take a polite loan of 200k to stock on my shop. The signs and symptoms of success. The bank commander, not the bank teller.
Why hassle for a loan when you've got MTN Momo? We're sorting. Use the Momo app or dial *165*5# for all quick loans. Choose from the different loan options from our partners and get one that works for you. Together, we're unstoppable.
The government of Uganda and the Uganda Bureau of Statistics is calling upon all stakeholders such as the chief administrative officers, city mayors, resident city commissioners, city clerks, city and division councillors, wards and LC chairpersons, as well as the residents and business communities to cooperate with the UBOS field teams as we embark on advanced preparations to conduct the National Population and Housing Census on the 10th of May 2024. The census will be a 10-day exercise to obtain statistical data and information that will be used for planning and policy formulation, including information on 1. How many we are, 2. Where we are, 3. How we are living, 4. What we own, and 5. Where we access services from. The Uganda Bureau of Statistics has now started listing of households and mapping in the 11 cities of Arua, Fort Portal, Gulu, Hoima, Jinja, Lira, Mbale, Masaka, Mbarara, Soroti, and in the Greater Kampala comprising of Kampala, Wakiso, and Mukono districts. For more information, please call 0755 342 128 or 0773 342 128. This message is brought to you by the Executive Director and Census Commissioner, Uganda Bureau of Statistics. Census 2024. It matters to be counted.